watch the news or listen to the radio. If I want a broken heart, I just look outside my window at a world that is searching for some meaning in this life. Even when I'm down, I know things will be alright. 'Cause I've read the book and I know how this story ends. No matter how bad it looks, I know that love is gonna win. All these tears will soon be dry. All these wrongs will be made right. What keeps me going is knowing that love is gonna win. I've had my share of rough times. I've got the scars as proof. Each one has taught me that I must hold on to God's truths. And I don't have to worry about the trials life may send, 'cause I know He'll always be faithful till the end. 'Cause I've read the book and I know how this story ends. No matter how bad it looks, I know that love is gonna win. All these tears will soon be dry. All these wrongs will be made right. What keeps me going is knowing that love is gonna win. I know there's coming a day when I'll see love face to face. 'Cause I've read the book and I know how my story ends. No matter how bad it looks, I know that love is gonna win. All my tears will soon be dry. All my wrongs will be made right. What keeps me going is knowing that love is gonna win. Love's gonna win. Love's gonna win. Love is gonna win.
Real Truth Revival. Love is gonna win.
I came upon some pilgrims. They looked burdened from their load. They were traveling an old highway, a long and dusty road. Then I saw a stranger leading them. He turned and with a smile, he said, "Give me all your burdens and rest a little while."
I asked one of these pilgrims, "Where are you going here today?" With a look so peculiar, here's what he had to say. "We're children of the Master. We're following him home. Though it seems a long, hard journey, there's something you should know. He's leading the way to a great somewhere
Barry Rowland and Deliverance, marching in victory.
This is the world's most listened to station for Southern Gospel. We're Affirm Southern Gospel Radio.
Kelley Blue Book is the one-stop shop for pricing, fixing, selling, and instant cash offering. Instant cash offer is exactly what it sounds like. An official offer to buy or trade your car. Just enter your VIN or license plate, answer a few questions about your car's history, and what kind of condition it's in.
Morning, everybody. Get organized here just a tad. I have to have a pen in my hand when I'm standing up here. I gotta have, if I have a pen that I can click, then I'm less likely to do this as I'm teaching. Not that it rules it out completely. All right, before we get started, let's go ahead. First of all, good morning. Happy Memorial Weekend to everybody. Let's go ahead and go to prayer this morning. Anybody, anywhere with a spoken request? Okay, Bruce. Somebody else? All right. Jamie.
My friend, his name's Eddie Stafford, too, anyhow. He passed away, moved their family, and I have two special unspoken prayer requests. Me and my family, and remember Marvin. It's really hurting.
All right. Anybody else with a spoken request? All right, sure everyone has unspoken prayer requests. Let's all stand if you would, please. Should be very easy to remember all the spoken requests this morning, so let's try to remember those as we go to prayer. And as always, let's remember to invite God into our service. That's what we're here for. Scotty, do you mind leading this morning, please? Anyone's got a passage or a verse you'd like to share with the rest of us? Something maybe you read this week.
I got something.
Okay, Bruce.
Yeah. Okay, like Mark here. Okay, this is Queen Esther chapter 9. So in the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, upon the 13th day of the same, when the king's commandment and his decree drew near to be put into execution in the day of the enemies of the Jews, hoped to have power over them
All right, anybody else? All right, we'll get into our lesson this morning. The title of it is The Trial of the Ages. Obviously, we're still in the book of Matthew. This is our last lesson in this quarter. For the last couple of quarters, we've been in Matthew. If you've got your booklet, this is on page 85. That's where this starts. So this morning we're going to bring this study of Matthew to a close, and it's a pretty dramatic ending. Book of Matthew is kind of interesting because it's one of the Gospels that shows everything from the birth to the crucifixion of Jesus. So you get the whole story there. The title of this lesson this morning calls it The Trial of Ages. We've had a lot of high-profile trials over the years, haven't we? So let's think about this for just a minute. We've had big trials that were sensationalized, televised, talked about all across the country, some very recently. How many of you watched or followed the O.J. Simpson trial when that was going on? Lived it every day, didn't you? Just so involved in that? It's all everybody talked about, what was going on. And how long did that go on?
Years.
Forever, right? Seemed like it. It was like a new miniseries on TV.
Yeah, I seen that, and I told Mom and Dad if he was innocent, he wouldn't be running like that.
Yeah, it was a real exciting low-speed pursuit he let him on there. For a long time, that was the only thing that you heard about. It was the only thing about on TV, at work. That's all everybody talked about was the O.J. trial. What's going on with the O.J. trial? We were all in. I would like to brag to you guys that I did not watch 1 minute of that trial. And I don't feel like I was deprived any by not seeing it at all. But that was all you saw on television, on any kind of media, all the talk about it. From the discovery of the homicide to the low-speed pursuit and the arrest of this famous man to the trial itself. I mean, it was all in the news, right? And I know it seemed like a year, but I think it was actually like weeks that the actual trial went on when it finally started. But it was truly the talk of the nation. And there's been other trials that were just as high profile, some that we've had recently, some pretty horrific, some not. If you remember some years ago, there was a woman that drowned all 5 of her children in a bathtub. I think that was in Texas. Because the voices in her head supposedly told her to do it. That was huge on the news, was it not? I mean, it was a big, high-profile, highly publicized trial. There was the lady that put her 2 kids in their seat belts in their car and just let it roll down into the lake, and with her 2 kids strapped in their car seats, obviously killing the children. And of course, there's others that have been less horrific, but just as publicized. Who watched all of the Johnny Depp Amber Heard fiasco? Did anybody actually watch any of that? No. Beth's admitting to it back there. She was very sheepish with the hand, but
It was pretty funny.
Yeah, and then there was the one, and I can't remember the lady's name, where she killed her boyfriend, and they were involved in all kinds of stuff in their private lives, and that was just a real big.
Well, the young Ayers, wasn't that around?
Eris or something like that? Yes, I believe it was, yes. And then, we've even had, to a lesser degree, but just as publicized. I mean, just think about the impeachment hearings of the former president that we had. So these are all big trials that we have all seen in our lives in recent years. Maybe some of you watched them, some didn't. The more bizarre the circumstances seem to be, the more we're drawn to it, right? It's like moths to a flame. It's like, oh gosh, I got to hear the next whatever it is.
You're talking about impeachment. That takes back my memory all the way back to years of Watergate. And I get thinking about old Richard Nixon years ago. He had enough decency to resign before they impeached him. That's something that these presidents nowadays don't seem to have. That was decent of him to resign.
Yeah.
He done a decent thing after what he done.
Right. So why are we so fascinated with these high-profile trials like this? I mean, for those of you who admitted to watching these, what was the draw? You know, we get all involved. We get to kind of live this vicariously, I guess, through watching these media accounts, and we just hear such bizarre things, and we just get really focused on that, don't we? And we just kind of just sit and watch and stare and listen to this. But what happens, despite all the hype, all the hoopla, all this stuff that we went through while we were watching this, all the excitement and, you know, talking around the water cooler at work about, oh, what happened with OJ and all this stuff. What happens when it's all over with? Trial's over, decision's been made.
Life goes on.
Thank you. How important is it to you then? It's just something in your past, right? You go on to the next thing. We're probably looking for the next one. Our interest in it diminishes. You don't hear people talk about OJ too much anymore, do you? You don't even hear anybody, more recently, you don't hear anybody talk about Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. Who cares, right? In the grand scheme of things, these events, these trials, what impact do they have on your life? None. It's entertainment, right? That's all it is. It's just entertainment. Today, we're looking at some details of another trial. This one has a big difference in what we've talked about. Obviously, they couldn't publicize it like what we see today. It was, I'd say there was some hype and hoopla, but it wasn't as widespread. It probably didn't impact as many people in the local area geographically as it would today. But think about the trial we're going to be thinking about today. And I think you can all figure out this is going to be when Jesus stood trial prior to his crucifixion. Who did the accused kill? What crimes did the accused person commit? What was the reason it was so publicized? Why would it be such an important trial? Think of the difference in the question I asked about how did those other trials impact your life? All right, so now let's think about the impact that this trial that we're going to be studying about has had on all of our lives and has had on mankind for thousands of years. The results of this trial and so forth, we'll talk about some more of that. So Jesus didn't kill anybody, didn't torture anybody, didn't even do anything that would be considered criminal, right? It also differed from the others in a very important way. The trial that we read about this morning literally changed the world. It changed the trajectory of mankind, right? You know, as much of the other trials may have impacted you while you were watching it, as it ended, you forgot about it. You went on to something else, right? And this trial does the exact opposite. This was the beginning. What seems like it should have been the end was actually the beginning, especially for us, the Christian. All right, so let's read through this. We'll do it like we always do. I'll read the first verse, you guys read after me, and then we'll go back and we'll discuss this. This is taken from Matthew 27, and I wish they had covered all of the chapter. We'll have to kind of recap some of the stuff in the middle that we skipped some verses here. So we'll just read it as it is in our booklet, and then we'll come back and talk about it. In verse 1, it says, "When the morning was come, all the chief priests and elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death.
When they had bound him, they led him away and delivered him to Pontius Pilate, the governor.
Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the common hall and gathered unto him the whole band of soldiers.
And they stripped him and put him on the scarlet robe.
And when they had platted a crown of thorns, they put it upon his head, and a reed in his right hand. And they bowed the knee before him and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews!
And they split upon him and took the reed and smote him.
And after that they had mocked him, they took the robe off from him and put his own raiment on him and led him away to crucify him. And when they were come unto a place called Golgotha, that is to say, a place of a skull,
They gave him into the
And they crucified him, parted his garments, casting lots, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet. They parted my garments among them, and upon my vesture did they cast lots. And set up over his head his accusation written, This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. Amen. All right. So we start out this morning at the beginning of Jesus' trial. I'll say it's the beginning. The decision's already been made, as we can tell by reading the first verse or two there. It's not really much of a trial for Jesus, but they're going through the motions anyway, right? So we can't be accused of doing anything wrong. We're gonna stick with the way things are supposed to go here. So they're getting ready to start this trial. It's the day after he was arrested. You know, it's funny. It seems today, like with these big high-profile things that we were talking about, how much time goes by from the time the person is arrested until their trial? My goodness, it seems like, what are we waiting on here? And you know, I think our Constitution says you have the right to a fair and speedy trial. We don't do anything very speedy. I'm not sure how fair they are, but I think we can all agree they're not very speedy. In those days, apparently, they had a speedy trial. Jesus was arrested the evening before. He's on trial today, okay? So he's standing before these people. He didn't have to wait for days or for months or years to go by, sitting in a prison. He's going to trial. So what was Jesus arrested for? What was he accused of? Blasphemy. Basically, everything that he was saying, everything he was doing was blasphemy. And they finally had enough. I mean, you think about the differences today. Today, in those days, blasphemy was, if you were found guilty of blasphemy, you could be stoned to death, put to death, crucified, whatever their popular method of execution was in those days. What do you get for blasphemy today?
Cheers.
You name in the newspaper, something. You're right. It's made light of. You can say whatever you want. First Amendment, all that good stuff. So they called it blasphemy, but basically he was accused of he was being blamed, arrested for basically telling the truth. All he was doing was telling people who he was, why he was here, the way to the Father, and they arrested him for that. They arrested him for telling the truth. He was arrested and condemned and killed for telling the truth. We don't see much of that today. So anyway, they finally feel like they have enough against him to put an end to this ministry. And the way they're going to put an end to Jesus' ministry is put an end to him, right? They bound him and they take him to Pontius Pilate, the governor. And you can see in verse 1 there that says, the morning came, the chief priests and the elders of the people took counsel against him to put him to death. That was not to try and see if he's guilty or not. We're going to bring these charges and kill him. They've already made up their minds. The decision has long been made. So they take him to Pontius Pilate, who was the governor. Now, he's an important guy. He serves the Roman emperor at the time. And he was second only to the emperor. He didn't answer to anybody except to Caesar, period. Why didn't Jesus' accusers handle this themselves? Why take him to the Roman governor? Didn't want blood on their own hands. Now we want him dead, but we want you to do it. Okay, so that's kind of the route that they took here. They didn't want to handle this themselves. We're the religious leaders. We're better than this, but we've condemned him to die. They were okay with that part of it, but not the physical, let's put him to death. We'll just let the Romans take care of this. This is a Roman problem now. And what really got them was, saying the way that you can see the way the Roman soldiers labeled this, accusing him of being the king of the Jews and blah, blah, blah. So that's basically what they kind of went to the Romans with. Oh, he's saying he's king and Caesar's the emperor. Jesus can't. So this is a Roman violation now. We'll let you guys handle this problem. So anyway, they delivered him to Pontius Pilate, and we're going to let him take care of this issue. So our text jumps from verse 2 to verse 27 here, which there's a whole bunch of important stuff, I believe, about that we've left out of our text this morning about what has happened in between from the time they show up with, in front of Pontius Pilate with Jesus, and here's this guy, he's saying he's the king and whatever, so you guys need to do something with him. So in the next few verses, you can see that the outcome of all of this was predetermined. There was nothing of a surprise in anything that really happened with this. Jesus has literally been condemned. When they got to this point where they were ready to make that arrest of Jesus, they were ready to follow this through all the way to the end. There was no chance of another outcome. It has been determined, and they're going to go through with this. Judas, as you all remember, was the apostle that betrayed Jesus. When he saw what was going on, now here's how bad this whole trial, we'll call it a trial. The trial was so bad that when Judas, the man who betrayed Jesus, saw what was going on, he regretted his decision so badly that he tried to return the money. Now the religious leaders won't touch that either, though. Oh, no, it's blood money. They didn't have a problem paying it, but they didn't want it back. But when he saw what had transpired by his betrayal of Jesus, and obviously he was not the only one acting in all this, it bothered him to the point he regretted it so bad he committed suicide. No chance of redemption for him. It doesn't say that he regretted this to the point of redemption. He regretted it, what he had done, and he killed himself. Jesus, through all of his trial, his questioning by Pontius and so forth, he didn't even argue his own defense. He sat silently, as was prophesied. He did not offer any argument. They brought these accusations, are you this, did you this, blah, blah, blah. And Jesus was basically, if you say, if that's what you say. He didn't offer any kind of argument for any of it. But something happened here. So all these accusations are brought. The Jews are so anxious to hand him off to the Roman government, and please do something with this guy. Pilate came to a pretty quick decision. As he's listening to this and he's questioning Jesus, he realized something pretty quickly. Anybody know what he realized?
See no guilt.
There was no guilt. This man was guilty of nothing. That this was an innocent man standing in front of him, had committed no. Now, of course, he can only rule based on Roman law. He's committed no crime against the Roman government. He's committed no crime against the emperor, and no crime against the army, the soldiers, or anybody of Rome. He's here because the Jews want him dead, because they don't like him, basically. But there was nothing against Jewish law that would indicate that he needed to do anything about this. Coming to that decision could have changed the outcome of all of this, could it not? I mean, if he'd have just said, I see no fault, send him on. But he didn't. He didn't do that. He could have simply dismissed this entire affair and been done with it, and probably would have, except for one thing. What was he worried about? His own self, his own position. I don't want to mess this up. This is a nice gig I got here. So, he's in Jerusalem here, and he's overseeing this area of what is now a Roman territory. He's the overseer here. He has no boss except for the emperor, who's back in Rome. He can run this any way he wants. He can do whatever he wants. He could have, and probably would have, just turned Jesus loose. But these religious leaders and the elders weren't stupid men. They were sly. If you read Jewish history, Old Testament, which we're going back into next quarter, back into the Old Testament, The religious leaders were well practiced on manipulating things according to their lifestyle, the way they wanted to live, what they interpreted, and that influenced everybody, the whole population, and that's what they did. So once they could see that Pontius Pilate was like, I don't see anything to condemn this guy for. Well, you know, he says he's king, and that's going to, what about Caesar? I guess we'll just go tell Caesar what he said, and we'll see what Caesar has to say about it. Well, Pontius didn't want to hear that. Okay, okay, I get what you're saying now. So he turns Jesus over, basically, to, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. Pilate even offered up another prisoner, didn't he? We got this guy over here. Why don't we set this guy Jesus loose and y'all take him? Nope. We want the guy Jesus. Let the murderer go. Makes a lot of sense, right? So finally, after all this back and forth, the decision was made. Pontius Pilate basically says, all right, we'll do whatever you guys say. So it's their decision, but we're going to use my men to do it. I got the muscle. You guys, you make the call, what you want to do, and that's what we're going to do. And they did. Does that sound like much of a trial to anybody in this room? No. So, to keep the Jews happy, to stop them from going to Caesar and letting Caesar know, hey, you're being threatened by this guy here, and old Pilate's not doing a thing about it. He says, okay, let's just do it. I'll hand him over. So Jesus was led to a common hall where the soldiers were gathered around. And I'm just kind of recapping from some of these verses here. This comes out of verse 27. And he's handed over to a band of soldiers. Now, I don't know how many a band of soldiers is, but more than a couple of guys, all right? So he's handed over to them basically to do whatever they wanted. It was up to them. Handle it however you want to handle this. All right, any questions or comments before we keep going?
You said Jesus died, he gave up the ghost, and I talked to John, I was reading that, Sunday school lesson, and I got thinking, Old Testament times when somebody died, they said they gave up the ghost, that was their spirit, and the Holy Spirit is the Holy Ghost, that's Jesus' spirit. And I believe there's all different kinds of spirits. There's spirits of sorrow, spirits of happiness, spirits of joy, spirits of anger, spirits of pain. And I think sometimes you can see these spirits by people's expressions on their faces. And spirits can go through walls and doors and things. They're going around everywhere.
Yeah. All right, in the next couple of verses 28 and 29, it says, and they stripped him and put on him a scarlet robe. And when they had plaited a crown of thorns, they put it upon his head and a reed in his right hand. And they bowed their knee before him and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews. So Jesus is stripped of his own garments, and they dressed him up in a scarlet robe. What's the significance of that? Why would they bother doing that?
Represent the king's colors.
Yeah, this is a royal color. If you've got on scarlet, crimson, red, and purple was another color that was associated with being a royal color. The whole thing was a mockery. The Roman soldiers had got to the point now where let's have some fun with this. I mean, they've been given free rein to do what they want, basically, and they're gonna ride it out. I can imagine that the more they did, the more the crowd around is responding. So this would probably be the equivalent of us watching the O.J. trial back in the day. The more bad things that happened to Jesus, the more stuff that was going on in this trial caused more and more of the emotions of the crowd and those that were standing around watching all this to get stirred up as well. So they put him in this scarlet robe, not that they were trying to show him any respect, but so that they could ridicule Jesus. Oh, look at the king now, look at the king. So they take these thorns, they braid it into a crown down on his head. They hand him a reed, like, here's your scepter. Oh, let's kneel before Jesus, the King of the Jews. Again, they were not trying to be respectful. They were not trying to show any kind of admiration or anything like that. They were simply publicly making fun of Jesus. This is a man who is getting ready to be crucified. They're just having fun with all this. But the soldiers are taunting him and calling him all this stuff and carrying on. In verses 30 and 31, the ridicule and the mockery continue, and they spit upon him and took the reed and smote him on the head. And after that they had mocked him, they took the robe off from him and put his own raiment on him, and they led him away to crucify him. So the abuse continues during all of this. Now this particular passage doesn't really go into the scourging and all that, what we read here. Some of it was in the verses that we passed over here. But they continue to torture, to ridicule, to mock Jesus. It's not bad enough that you're being accused of something that is the truth, that you're certainly on your way to be killed for this. They have to continue the mockery and the ridicule the whole time they're doing it, to add insult to injury, or pour salt in the wound, however you want to say that. So they took the robe back, because they're certainly not going to soil their nice red robe. They take the robe back from him, and they put his own clothing back on him. And he's led away to be crucified. Now think about how fast all this is going. The arrest the day before, this morning, the trial, the condemnation, let's go, you're getting executed. You know, we have a lot of, and again, going back to today, you know, we have a lot of these high-profile, horrible crimes that are committed. And you'll see someone brought to trial after months, years, however long they've sat waiting for trial, all these continuations and everything back and forth. And finally we have a trial. And then the trial lasts for weeks, months, however long. And then you have, let's assume there's a conviction. Okay, let's lead them, and let's say it's a capital crime, and they're given the death sentence. So they're marched straight to the injection chamber or the electric chair, right? No, we see people today, years, 10, 20 years, maybe more, where someone literally sits on death row. They've already been convicted by court of law, jury of their peers, whatever the case is, and we leave someone sitting. This person has been condemned to be executed, yet they sit in prison for years. 10, 20 years is not unheard of for someone who's convicted of a crime where they're going to be put to death. We see this all the time. You see on the news, such and such prisoners being put to death today in Florida or in Texas or in wherever that they still do executions. And you, oh, I don't remember, what did he do? Oh yeah, it was back in 1970, blah, 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 or 19, whatever year. It's like, why, just let him die in prison if we're going to do that. But anyway, so that was not the case in these days. To show you how things have really, really changed. Jesus has been arrested. He was basically convicted at the time of his arrest. They already knew what they were going to do. They knew what they wanted to do anyway. He's already been condemned. He's been convicted, and he is on his way to be executed. All in the course of a 24-hour period. So they do all this stuff. They take the robe back, give him his own clothing. You know, you sort of look, the way we kind of treat this executing people, it's like, you know, what's the hurry, right? That's kind of the attitude we take. But with Jesus, there was no appeals, no pardons, no stay of execution. Let's just get this over with. He's been condemned, he's been convicted. Let's get it over with. Let's take him to die. In verses 32 through 34, and as they came out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name, and they compelled him to bear his cross. And when they were come unto a place called Golgotha, that is to say, a place of a skull, they gave him vinegar to drink, mingled with gall, and when he had tasted thereof, he would not drink. You know, you read this account, you know, today, we have to treat inmates with kid gloves. Even those who have been convicted of horrible crimes against other people, where they have maimed, tortured, assaulted, You can read all the details. Some of them are very public about what a person did to another person as they were putting them to death. Okay? But you see all of that kind of stuff going on. But we have to treat that person very carefully. Jeff's in corrections. He could probably vouch for what I'm saying. There's things you don't do. There's things you can't say, things you can't touch this person. They certainly can't be tortured or harmed or beaten or whatever. Now, I'm not saying that life in prison or jail is pleasant by any means. I am certain that it's not. But there's some degree of dignity and respect an inmate must be treated with by those that are housing them, the government, okay? Not in Jesus' case. Now, we're talking about the Son of God, God in the flesh, being treated this way, spat upon, beaten. They put his clothes back on. They've already taken that crown of thorns, made sure they tapped that into his skull real nice with that reed stick they gave him. And now, in addition to all that, he's severely injured from all the beating and the abuse, he's being led to Golgotha. You also have to carry your instrument of execution. Okay? So Jesus' cross, his crucifix, is already made up. He's got to lug it up the hill to where and then he's going to be nailed to it. This was something that the condemned person had to do. Well, Jesus was so severely injured during his beating and all the torture and abuse that he had taken that he was struggling to carry this. So the Roman soldiers was like, we can't wait on this guy. Come on, we got to speed this up. I got lunch, ball game's getting ready to come on, whatever. Let's get this done. So they recruit a guy who's hanging around outside of his house or whatever, walking down the street. Hey, you, help this guy carry this up the street. So he does. Were they showing mercy to Jesus, do you think, by having somebody else carry his cross? It was more of a matter of expedience. Let's just get it over with. Let's hurry up here. So they've got this other guy helping to carry the cross on the way to Golgotha. And then, adding more insult to injury, these kind soldiers offer Jesus something to drink, right? Oh, let's be nice to this guy. Let's give him something to drink here. What did they give him? Vinegar and gall. Anybody know what gall is?
Something ease the pain. It was something ease the pain.
Well, it's a bitter. From what I read, it was made from wormwood, which was another plant. It was bitter and it was nasty to drink. And of course, vinegar is only good on greens. So. But that's what they give him to drink. And Jesus takes a sip of this, and obviously he can't drink that, So all of this other stuff that they've piled up on him, now they give him something to quench his thirst that he can't possibly drink. You couldn't drink that. So it's just a very, very bitter combination of something to drink. Now, you imagine you're on your last legs. You've been beaten, tortured, marching to the place where you're going to hang on this timber that you're going to be hung on. I'm sure he was thirsty. Couldn't even get a drink of water. So again, let's go back and look at trials today. Does this look much like a trial that we would have today by any means? No. All right, so anyway, in verse 35, and they crucified him and parted his garments, casting lots, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet. They parted my garments among them, and upon my vesture did they cast lots. So Jesus was hung on the cross as prophesied, and also as prophesied, his garments were divided and basically bought. Now, can you imagine this? You're sitting at the foot of the cross where, and not with any respect or awe, again, you're one of the Roman soldiers, and you're at the foot of this cross. This man's hanging on, he's still alive. And you're taking little pieces of his garments. Hey man, look at this. Here's a souvenir to take home. This is going to be a nice heirloom to hand down to the family, right? I was there that day. Look what I got out of this. These were very nice people, by the way. I've often thought as you read this, we see, even today, we see things in the Middle East, events and the way they treat captives and people or folks that they think have sinned against, Allah or whoever. They don't value or treat life the way we do here. It's a totally different viewpoint about what they're doing. So here they are making a big party out of this while Jesus is still suffering, hanging on the cross. He's been nailed to it. The cross is upright. They're down here making bets and selling the garments that he's wearing as they take off pieces of clothes and grab this. Well, I'm going to take that. You get this, blah, blah, blah. Wasn't a surprise. It had all been prophesied in the past, and that's exactly what happened. All right, in verses 36 and 37, and sitting down, they watched him there and set up over his head his accusation written, "This is the king, this is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Again, these guys are sitting, waiting for this guy to die. Man, my shift's almost over. I wish he'd hurry up and get this done. He's hanging on the cross. The soldiers take this opportunity to sit back and relax, right? They're just, we may as well take a break now. We've got to wait a little bit. They're relaxing and just sitting and watching a slow, miserable death. It says a lot about somebody that could do that kind of thing. Anyway, they even wrote this little title to display, which is basically what he was crucified for, because he was the King of the Jews. Jesus was King of the Jews. So they had their little sign, they had their little fun, and so forth. Now, again, our text jumps from verse 37 to verse 50. Verse 50 says, Jesus, when he had cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. I think it's important that we go back and read, and I'm not going to read them out loud. We're about out of time here. Go back and, if you get a chance, and read those verses that we skip over. You think about, and it kind of looks at it from a perspective of you're hanging on the cross. Can you imagine what a lonely feeling, a horrible feeling that must be? You're getting ready to die. There's nobody helping you. You've been separated from mankind. Jesus hanging on the cross is now separated from God the Father. I can't imagine a more lonelier time in a person's life, a more low time in a person's life than to be hanging like he was and just waiting while everybody else is just sitting around waiting. Nobody's offering help. Nobody's trying to do anything for him. Just waiting for the end. Finally, the inevitable happens. Jesus cries out, in our verse here, Jesus cried out with a loud voice and yielded up the ghost. Now, Jesus willingly gave up the ghost. He did not, the crucifixion didn't per se kill him, nor did the torture, nor did the puncture of the lungs with the spear. Jesus finally, it's done. And he gave up the ghost. He did this willingly. His life wasn't taken as much as it was given up. Jesus gave his life for us. And that's the end of the text. That's the end of what our lesson goes today. But it seems like this is the summation of where we started. If you think about Matthew, go back and read chapter 2 in Matthew. And you read about the birth of Jesus, who he was, what he's come to do, his parents, and all this stuff, and his childhood. And then we jump forward to the end of the story like this, and we saw how all of this ends up. And you would think, okay, well, that was a great story. That was tragic, but it was a good story to read. Seems like the end, doesn't it? Jesus is dead. That's the end of the story. That's just the beginning. Everything that happened that day was prophesied. It was by God's plan, God's design that this would happen. What seems to be the end was the beginning for us, because this trial, unlike all those other trials we talked about, led to something that no other trial could accomplish. All those other trials that we talked about, and we agreed that once it's done and over with, it's forgotten, right? means nothing to me. Okay, shame for them, too bad, whatever. I'm going on about my life. This trial resulted in reconciliation with God. We had no way to reconcile or restore a relationship with God. We were separated from God from Adam, the very first man. Our relationship with God was severed. The rest of the Bible, to this point, is about restoring that relationship, is it not? It's about God trying to get man to restore that relationship. And that could only be accomplished through Jesus Christ and his crucifixion. If it wasn't for the shedding of his blood, it never would have been restored. Because of Jesus' actions and the ordeal that we have with, our relationship with God has been restored. And we can't change that. That's something that will never be forgotten. And the repercussions of that trial that we just studied about, that we read about, has reverberated through thousands of years. Think about that. All of those networks and trying to get the big ratings by televising all these high-profile trials, you know what? Once those are done, it's done. This trial that has echoed for years and will continue to do so. All right, we're done. We're done with our study for Matthew for